Explorers of Minnesota. She has a list of accomplishments that will take longer for me to read than it would for her presentation last year tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Julie McKuras.
Well, thank you, Greg. I'm not sure about all those accomplishments, but I can say I've never been in jail. So we'll start with that. It's an honor to join you this evening. And if you'll bear with us for a minute, we're going to bring up the PowerPoint. And I'm going to turn off the camera so you can get the full splendor of that presentation.
While we're doing that, I'm going to ask everyone, please mute themselves except Julie.
You might regret not asking me to mute myself. So is my screen visible?
Right now, I'm only seeing your name.
Okay, so bear with us one more time, one moment. I'd sing, but I don't think that would be good.
It's Mike sing.
He does some pretty good Motown.
There we go.
Okay, there we go. So I hope our fanciful romp through the love and marital life of one John H. Watson tonight will be entertaining and provide some food for thought. Now, our virtual gathering takes place during a busy season. Perhaps you're still shopping and decorating your home for Christmas or celebrating Hanukkah, times of year which people generally associate with family, friends, and faith. Whatever your spiritual beliefs are or aren't, there is another holiday that occurs in the chill of December that we can universally honor. Today, the 14th, is Roast Chestnuts Day, which leads me to my topic for tonight. Holmes and Watson might have celebrated the holidays together when both were residing in Baker Street, and when Watson was absent, Holmes could share his eggnog or latkes with his brother Mycroft. But with no relatives and, shall we say, a rather loosely documented marital history, with whom is Dr. Watson roasting his chestnuts? A wife, one might suppose, but tonight I don't want to talk about all of Watson's wives, but instead his second wife. Now, any discussion of Watson's love life begins with the fact that he was a man of action. Action, which he himself noted involved experiences of women, which extended over many nations and 3 separate continents. He clearly had an eye for the ladies. Pardon me, had an eye for the ladies, and rarely missed an opportunity to describe the charms of the various women he encountered. He didn't marry early and often, as Chicago political advice goes, but he was married more than once. Let's take a look at his wedded bliss timeline, utilizing the William Baring Gould chronology, my personal favorite for dating the stories, and identify the second Mrs. Watson. The first canonical reference to Dr. Watson's marital status appears in The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor, which Baring Gould dates as occurring in October 1886. Watson states, "It was a few weeks before my own marriage." That same month in 1886, he documented the second stain that 2 European visitors came to their rooms in Baker Street, indicating he's still living with Holmes and remains single. As late as April 1887, Holmes and Watson are sharing bachelor quarters in the Reigate Squires. There must have been a slight delay in tying the knot, because it wasn't until May 1887 that we learned that Dr. Watson has finally deleted his app for eHarmony and left the dating scene. He wrote in A Scandal in Bohemia that my marriage has drifted us away from each other. My own complete happiness and the home-centered interests which rise up around the man who first finds himself master of his own establishment were sufficient to absorb all my attention. Now, I find the key word here to be first, as in first marriage, first wife. The following month, in June 1887, in The Man with the Twisted Lip, Watson writes that as the hour for bedtime approached, the sound of the bell caused Mrs. Watson to put her needlework down on her lap and, with a little face of disappointment, lament that a patient at the door means he'll have to go out. Now, even though she does refer to him as James, apparently they are still on the honeymoon. Only 3 months later, in September 1887, Watson's wife was on a visit to her mother, as recorded in the 5 Orange Pips. He was a dweller for several days in his old quarters at Baker Street and conveniently available to assist with the mystery brought to them by John Openshaw. Baring Gould noted that few cases ever conducted by Sherlock Holmes present greater difficulties to the chronologist than the Sign of Four, which he dates as September 1888. Only 14 months have passed since the scandal in Bohemia and The Man with the Twisted Lip, and 12 months since the 5 Orange Pips. Nothing in the subsequent cases leading up to the Sign of Four gives us reason to believe that Watson is no longer married. Yet in this story, the good doctor seems smitten with their refined and sensitive new client. When the Agra treasure is lost and the golden barrier between them removed, Watson declared his love for Mary Morstan. He wrote, "Whoever had lost a treasure, I knew that night I had gained one." Now, I'm not sure here if the treasure he's referring to was Mary or the 6 fine pearls she owned. Watson went on to inform Holmes that Miss Morstan has done me the honor to accept me as a husband in prospective. And Holmes responded by giving a most dismal groan, stating that he really couldn't congratulate him. Why a dismal groan and no offer of best wishes? We have no evidence of such a negative reaction from Holmes with Watson's first marriage, and Holmes apparently has no issue with Miss Morstan. The bigger question for me is, where is Watson's wife when he becomes engaged to the young blonde Mary Morstan? I believe Holmes' grim reaction was because he knew that Watson was still a married man. Now, I'd like to be clear here and say I applaud anyone who plans ahead. And Watson does seem to have a really solid plan B in place for wife number 2. But for that, wife number 1 has to be out of the picture. And we heard nothing about her death. We might speculate that Mrs. Watson's visit to her mother in the 5 Orange Pips was to cry on her mother's shoulder about a pending separation or divorce. But Watson doesn't inform the reader that these marriage-ending events actually happened. Should a wedding with Mary have occurred, which Watson never mentions, he might have faced a charge of bigamy. In fact, we never hear of Mary by name again. So I am dismissing her as the second Mrs. Watson and instead regarding her as a mere ship, not a barge, passing in the night. Now, 2 cases occur in June 1889, which reinforce that Watson was still married. The first sentence in early June's Boscombe Valley Mystery relates that he's sitting at the breakfast table with his wife. The second June 1889 case is the stockbroker's clerk. Watson writes that shortly after his marriage, he bought a connection in the Paddington district and for 3 months was kept too busy to see much of his friend Holmes. Note that he says he didn't see him much, not that he didn't see him at all. Therefore, the purchase could have taken place at any time before Hall Pycroft came on the scene. As the story goes on, a comment by Holmes reinforces my belief about Watson and wife number 1. Holmes states, "I trust that Mrs. Watson has entirely recovered from all the little excitements connected with our adventures of the Sign of Four. The previous year's case was indeed one which posed considerable danger, but I don't think the peril to Watson was from the little hellhound Tonga and his murderous darts as much as it was from his own wife. I think Holmes was asking if Watson was back in her good graces after his romance with Mary Morstan, a situation which would probably have caused more than a little excitement at Shea Watson." There is a subsequent reference to my wife in the engineer's thumb, and I believe that this wife is his first and only spouse at this point, and that she has reconciled with the Lothario of London. The Naval Treaty, which Baring Gould dates as late July, early August 1889, opens with the announcement that the July which immediately succeeded my marriage was made more memorable by 3 cases of interest. Those cases cited were the undocumented The Adventure of the Tired Captain, and the other was the October 1886 The Adventure of the Second Stain, before he wed wife number 1. And here I must disagree with Baring Gould's dating of the Naval Treaty in 1889 as before Watson's marriage, as it's clear that he based this on his own belief, shared by many, I must admit, that Watson married Mary Morstan. I beg to differ and feel it was Watson's wife number 1 who encouraged him to waste no time in relaying Percy Phelps' story to Holmes. In April 1891, Watson notes the final problem takes place after his marriage, so we know he's still married, although his wife is again, as ever, conveniently away on a visit, leaving him free for a European jaunt with Holmes. And we all know what happened on that trip to Switzerland. But in that momentous spring of 1894, Watson reveals in The Empty House that Holmes has reappeared in London. After relating everything that happened during the 3 years between the events at the Reichenbach Falls and his eventual return to that great cesspool after the hiatus, Watson writes almost as an afterthought that in some manner he had learned of my own sad bereavement, although we never learn exactly what happened and what Holmes said, other than work is the best antidote to sorrow. Now let's keep in mind that Holmes never relayed any such sentiment about bereavement in The Sign of 4, when Watson became engaged to Mary Morstan, leading me to argue that the first Mrs. Watson was alive and kicking at the time. At some point in the period between 1891 and 1894, the first Mrs. Watson has apparently left this vale of tears, and Holmes is anxious to get Watson back in the saddle. Work was apparently the best antidote to sorrow, and life moved on for Dr. Watson. In the January 1903 case, The Blanche Soldier, Holmes writes that the good Watson had at that time deserted me for a wife, the only selfish action which I can recall in our association. Without any notice of fanfare, the mysterious second wife has appeared. Again, we don't know her given name any more than we did about the second Mrs. De Winter in the book Rebecca. Actually, we don't know anything at all about her, similar to what we knew or didn't know about his first wife. But there she is. Now, despite Watson's wayward womanizing over nations and continents, Dorothy L. Sayers believed only one left any abiding memory in his heart, and that was the woman she believed to be his only wife, Mary Morstan. We can't know what was in Watson's heart, only what he wrote, and he wrote quite sparingly of his first wife and next to nothing about his second wife. Holmes described this second marriage as a selfish action. Why did he describe it that way? Was it because he didn't like sharing his friend with a woman? Or was it sharing a woman with his friend? Was she a sore subject between them? Or is it possible that the second Mrs. Watson had a story of her own, one so perilous that the contemporary reading public couldn't know who she was? Did Holmes describe Watson's act as selfish because he feared that even the mention of her name would put her in danger? Who was this woman? In May 1887, Watson referred to my candidate for the second wife position as deceased. But was she? Holmes and Watson's May 1887 royal client proved himself to be a narcissistic cad who said that he believed the woman in question would keep her word not to reveal the photographic evidence of their romance. Considering what a rascal he was, though, could he be trusted to keep that promise? His lovely ex-paramour was a famous personality, and there was a very real possibility that she would never be safe from him. As scholar and gentleman Sherlock Holmes collection's curator Timothy Johnson once mentioned, he wondered if this lovely woman was in the Watsonian Witness Protection Program. To guarantee her safety, Watson wrote that the Grim Reaper had come calling, and he declared her morte. Last month at the ASH meeting, irregular Maria Fleischack also speculated that in order to protect her, a false obituary had appeared. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I believe this second wife was none other than the daintiest thing under a bonnet, that New Jersey opera singer, a diva from one of the 3 continents mentioned by our Don Juan, or should we say Don John. Years after her entanglement with the King of Bohemia and her own first husband, now dead, our widow Chanteuse and widower Watson reconnected. Sparks flew, and soon she was singing late night arias to him. To Sherlock Holmes, she was always the woman, remembered with grudging admiration for her strength and wit. Happily, she found love and companionship with a more suitable partner. Holmes seldom referred to her by name, and Watson out-Holmesed even Holmes by purposely never mentioning her name or having her included in any illustrations. To keep her identity concealed, she took her second husband's name, making her the second Mrs. Watson. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll join me in saluting the woman I believe was the second wife we often toast, Irene Adler Norton Watson. And thank you to all of you for joining me and having some fun and playing the game regarding Watson's second wife, who I feel made sure that Dr. Watson's chestnuts were thoroughly roasted. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. For those that want to ask any questions of Julie, if you could use the chat feature, you could go in there, just type the word question. I will then call on you to unmute and to ask your question.
Okay, we're getting the screen back here. I know you probably think that's a picture of me and Mike sitting there, but.
I thought it was a self-portrait.
Okay, I'm back.
Any questions for Julie? We have a comment from Tamar. What a conclusion. I used to be able to talk. Mike Swiggan, well done. Some rounds of applause here for you.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you.
Any questions for Julie? At this point, just unmute and go ahead and ask your question. Julie, you covered the topic so thoroughly, no one has any questions.
Either that or just they're so completely dumbfounded that they.
Actually, Greg, I've got something.
Please.
Hi, Julie. How are you?
Hi, Vince.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Thank you. Can I have a copy of that paper?
You know, I could just fold it up like a paper airplane, or I could email it to you.
That sounds good. I'm actually working on something that deals with that very subject specifically. As a matter of fact, I was working on it today, so this works out nicely. But
So
yeah,
great minds think alike. Is that what
they
you're
do,
telling
don't
me?
they? So at any time, if you could ship that through the wires to me, that would be wonderful.
I would be happy to.
You're a good person.
My mother and father tried to raise me well.
Kudos to them.
Julie, have you read the pastiche, or whatever you want to call it, Sherlock in Love?
No, I haven't.
Oh, then I won't say any more. But, well, I don't know. Should I recommend it? I bet you I'd get a hearty chorus of no's if everybody else were asked. But Watson and Irene make a connection there as well.
So I'm not the only one who's thought this. Oh my God.
Well, you're one of the great minds thinking
I feel
alike.
so validated.
Well, Julie, I'd like to throw in a thought. As you may know, over the years, I have scheduled many talks by the master himself at various events. And he was often asked the question whether how often Dr. Watson was married. And his response normally was, the question was not how many times he had been married, but how many wives he had at the moment.
You know, and see, that's the kind of guy who has plan B. So, you know, and in terms of recommending that book, you know, I'd probably like to bring up a subject most of you have forgotten, which is we're in the midst of a pandemic, and I've gotten a little less selective about what I read and write or watch on television. So thank you for the recommendation.
And definitely Sherlock in Love. No, you know what? I enjoyed it, but I think I'm the only one. So.
Well, I'm writing it down.
I liked it too, Karen. So
Okay.
there's two of us.
Well, okay, times two. Good enough for me. The sad thing will be when I go upstairs to the books and realize I've had it for 10 years.
Not bad. And with that, Julie, thank you so much. We enjoyed the presentation very much. We hope you can come back for a future meeting again in the near future.
You know, I don't have an ankle bracelet on keeping me at home and I can travel virtually, so
Glad to hear that. Again, thank you very much.
thank you.
And if this had been a normal meeting of the 6 Napoleons, and let's be honest, in 2020, what has been normal this year, we would invite neophyte members to exit the room and be taken to the Inquisition chamber. There is actually a membership process with the 6 Napoleons. We don't let just anybody in, although if you look around the room to see who some of our members are, you may have questions about that. Normally the process would be